Countless tributes have been pouring in, haven't they, for Bill Turnbull, the veteran news presenter who sadly passed away. Now, Bill was highly respected by everyone who watched him on TV and certainly, too, by everyone who worked with him.
During his long career, Bill did everything from reporting from war zones to showing off his fancy footwork on Strictly Come Dancing. And he also raised huge awareness about prostate cancer as well. Susanna, Bill's friend and former co-presenter, is here now. We're going to be chatting to you very shortly. It's lovely to see you, Susanna. First, though, she's taking a look back at his incredible legacy. I think he's been public about the fact that that's one of the most important things he's ever been able to do, is to share that story. It's lovely to see you this morning. Sorry it's in such sad circumstances, Susanna. I wonder if you remember the first time you met him and what he was like.
I do. It's interesting listening to that tribute because I can hear in my voice I was absolutely knocked sideways yesterday by the loss of Bill.
And I think sounded very emotional at times.
And I'm so glad that all that humour is in the tribute to him there, because he was such a funny person to be around. He was so much fun to be with. And I don't want to sound sombre talking about him, because he had such a sense of humour. I remember when he presented on this programme, we called him a sauce pot because he definitely had a way with the double entendres.
Did he?
Yeah, he really did, yes. And he was delightful company. I remember the first time I met him was more than 25 years ago.
Wow.
And like Sean, who also presented BBC Breakfast with him, I was his producer when he was a correspondent for BBC News in Washington, D.C.
Really?
Yeah, decades ago.
Didn't know that.
And he was incredibly hardworking, very skilled, a remarkable reporter. I felt actually quite intimidated working with him. And you definitely knew if you weren't performing up to scratch when you were hanging around Bill Turnbull. As I say, he taught me everything. I think a little bit of that rubbed off on me.
One of the things that is often said was he was an absolute stickler for detail.
Yeah.
Took the job really seriously, didn't take himself particularly seriously. Like, he could laugh at himself, but the job and the detail and the story was absolute.
Do you know what? That absolutely sums him up. He was a stickler for detail, for spelling and punctuation and grammar. He would rewrite, you know, every script to make sure that it was perfect, because he wanted the best programme that could possibly be. He threw himself into everything. When I worked with him at the BBC, we went hell for leather around the Manchester Velodrome on those racing bikes that have no brakes. And we also did a Come Dine With Me spoof for a Christmas special, and he was very competitive, really wanted to, you know, to get the 10 in the cooking competition. But then he would let it all go. To Bill, it was only telly. It was only telly. So he threw himself into it, was a stickler for it when he was doing it. But for him, the most important thing in his life was home, was family, was his wife, Ceci, and his children, was his dogs and his bees. Everything for Bill was in perspective. And, you know, that is such an important thing to know about him.
Because was so outspoken, and because he worked right up to the end with classic radio and all of those other things. I mean, you probably being so close to him maybe didn't think that, but he had that sense and you had that hope that he might have beaten it somehow.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, no. But I guess what he would say was important is he got out there and carried on and lived every moment, and hopefully has made sure that others don't have to go down that same path.
He very much lived with his cancer, didn't he? He lived every moment that he could. And I think you're right. I think we all feel robbed that there was only 5 years between the diagnosis and losing him. And I especially feel for Ceci, his wife, and his children and his family today. But his bravery and his openness in coming forward about his diagnosis and saying to people, if you feel the symptoms which you might not connect with cancer, for instance, if you get an unexpected bone pain or you have tiredness, those need to be checked out. He said that he described himself, you know, sort of typical man. He didn't want to waste a doctor's time. So he hadn't been to his GP for a number of years. And then, as he said, he then replaced that with a season ticket to the doctor. You know, of course, he was a massive Wycombe Wanderers fan. You know, football was a great part of his life. And he, you know, followed them right up to the end. They had a magnificent, you know, outing at Wembley, of course, this year. But he very much lived with his cancer. He said if there was one useful thing he did in his life, it was to be open about going to get yourself checked. The doctors and the cancer charities, you know, say there was this remarkable Turnbull-Fry effect of an increase in a third in the numbers of men going to get checked and treatment for prostate cancer, because Stephen Fry was also inspired by Bill. You know, they sort of motivated each other, you know. It wasn't the only useful thing Bill Turnbull did. He was remarkable on air. He was a remarkable person off air. But I know that he was glad that being open about what happened to him helped other people.
There's that thing, isn't there, that... this resonates with me particularly, but hearing him say he sort of took some pride in the fact he hadn't been to see his GP for 4 years, that was something that was, in some way, that was a mark of respect to the busyness of GPs and his health. But actually, naivety of that is what's going on because you're not paying attention to your physical ailments or whatever they might be.
Yeah.
And I absolutely understand that. The men in my family, and I've been sort of very guilty of that as well.
Yeah, and I know that there are viewers who will be watching right now who will have seen him talk about his cancer, seen him talk about that, the reluctance of men in particular to go to the doctor, will have heard him talking about those symptoms, and whose lives will undoubtedly have been saved because of what he said. There's a paragraph that I just wanted, a few lines that I just wanted to read, because these really hit home to me when I read them. He's said this after his diagnosis. You have to be positive, don't you? I know I'm not going to get cured, and I'm realistic about the long-term prospects. Most importantly, I really do think I've had a wonderful life with amazing experiences as a reporter and a presenter. And if it was all to end tomorrow, I couldn't have any complaints. I've had a really marvellous time. And I'm so grateful to have known him, so grateful to have worked with him, and so grateful he was here as well.
Yes.
With all of us
on
Good Morning Britain in the last couple of years, because I know, you know, that meant so much to our viewers. He was a really magnificent man.
They really enjoyed it. You worked with him for a bit as well, didn't you, Sean?
Yeah, so I started my breakfast career, actually, on the other side, like you, Susanna, and it was in this building. And I remember doing the sport on BBC Breakfast, my first shift, and he was... Yeah, he was just really kind, and I think we'd had the meeting beforehand, and he sort of announced me, and I was like, oh, God, he just wanted to slip in quietly and do my sport bulletin, but he sort of said, welcome to the team, Sean Fletcher, and it was, yeah, I remember thinking, this guy's he's decent, he's a good guy, isn't he?
Something when we know, because we all work together and working in live television, you have this implicit trust, you have to, in the person sitting next to you, because things can be going on, and I can be listening to something while Kate's doing something, Kate could be doing something and I'm listening. You have to be able to know that if you drop the ball, they will pick it up. And undoubtedly, talking to you about him, Susanna, that was something you could always rely on. He was an amazing person to sit alongside in an environment like this.
Totally. He inspired me. Like you, Sean, he mentored me. He mentored everybody on the programmes that he worked on. He was the sort of father of BBC Breakfast. You know, he taught everybody a lesson. And I mean, actually, I kind of do mean that in both ways. You know, he was absolutely, you know, he exacted high standards from people, but also he was very encouraging, very supportive. He was never critical. You just knew you wanted to do your best for him. He was so supportive, wasn't he, of younger talent. And as you say, Ben, if you needed him, he carried you. There were programmes, you know, when perhaps you might not have been able to get through an interview, might have been too upset, perhaps. You know, some very challenging stuff we do, isn't there? Might have been particularly tired at times. But Bill was always there for you. Always there for you.
That me as a young pup of a reporter there, coming into that BBC Breakfast scenario, you know, it's a big programme for someone who's young and, you know, probably I didn't really know what I was doing. And when the main presenter picks you out and introduces you to the team, that's big and that's sort of special. And it stuck with me.
And important.
How many years ago? 20 years ago that was.
Stayed with you.
Amazing.
He's going to be much, much missed.
Much missed.
Very fond
As,
member.
if I can say, on a more light note, as we've missed you. And you're back on Monday.
I'm back on Monday, absolutely, yeah.
Have you had a good summer, Susanna?
Yeah. I've had a very interesting summer.
Have you?
That
Yes.
sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Gosh, I wish we had a bit more time. That sounds like we need a cup of tea and some buns to work our way through that one. Yeah.
Oh, well,
okay.
it's good to see you. It's good to be back. And I just want to take this opportunity to send my love to all the viewers who are affected by the loss of Bill, but particularly to Ceci and the children. You know, loads and loads of love. And I know how hard this is for you at the moment. And, you know, we all of us, don't we, send our love
Absolutely.
to you.
Absolutely, all
And
of
I
us
will
do.
see you on Monday.
Yeah.
Lovely to see you. Thank you.
Fantastic, Susanna. Thank you.